So my husband Joe listens to this podcast about Ukraine every day. Okay, it's just Monday through Friday, but it's kind of a deep dive into Ukraine. It's militarily and politically what's going on, pretty intensely. And every time I get in the car and the podcast is on, I'm like, can we turn that down or can we turn that off? And it's not because I don't care, it's just because it's just a lot to really try to take in. And Joe, I think, to be fair, wants it to just remain a live thing, doesn't want it to just become the background that he's just forgotten about. And I think also, not just out of a sense of duty, he listens to the podcast because it's also inspiring and encouraging, because there are also these remarkable stories about courage and hope and commitment and light. And we've talked about some of those the last few months, that since the war began, there's been like 900 babies born every day, 250,000. And, you think about this mother who describes, when she's nursing, turning away from the window in case there's a blast, or parents, when there is a blast, just throwing their bodies onto their young. And also, though, refusing to give up joy and saying, like in the moment, just relishing this time with their little ones. But it's not just, little ones who are kind of living out the joy there in Ukraine. Some of you may have seen that story on public radio this summer about the beaches, like by the Black Sea. Normally in the summer, they'd just be crowded with all these people out there swimming, but not now. There are all these signs you can't swim. It's not because the current is bad. It's not because there's no lifeguard. It's because of all the unexploded mines floating in the water. But there was this grandmother, 90 years old, out there swimming in her floral bikini. And she was like, yeah, no one is going to make me get out of the water. I have been swimming here forever. I'm not worried about any unexploded mines. It was just that kind of sense of, joy, like we are going to go on. So the Gospel of John is sort of like that Ukrainian podcast. Different war, different dictator, but the same kind of encouragement, the same belief that goodness is going to win. And so the Gospel of John, unlike Matthew and Luke, kind of begins with this echo of Genesis. So it's like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and in the beginning God created. What God created was what good. So it's this affirmation that there is at the heart of life this incredible goodness. It's not this dictator Putin who's going to win. Instead, it's this source of life and hope. And that source of life and hope shows up in light. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. So during Advent, I've been reading this book of devotionals, and I'm not really a devotional kind of reader like that, but this is actually kind of a lovely book, and it's looking at a different animal every day during Advent, and kind of like their own patterns of hibernation, from the black bear to the bumblebee to the chickadee to the painted turtle. And every single animal really has the same story, which is try to survive the cold, try to survive the darkness, try to put on as much weight as you can. And probably my favorite one has been this firefly. You think about being a little kid and you think about fireflies, you think of the summer, right? How they glow and all that. That's their little mating dance, and they live a couple of weeks, and then they mate, and they hatch their eggs deep in the ground, and then they're gone, except for they're not really gone, because their eggs hatch and the larva, and then the worms come out. And if another little creature bumps up against them in any of those stages, they glow. There's a little bit of a glow. And then they spend 300 days eating under the dark earth, continuing to go into the darker earth as the colder it gets. And all the while, a tiny little glow until the weather warms up, and then they come out, right? And then there they are, flying around. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can't overcome it. Or you think in the last couple of weeks, the really tragic stories we have heard coming out of Ukraine about, people actually targeting the power grid, which seems just really unbelievably cruel. And then you see these stories of all of these, city streets that are still lit up because of the generators, or the little places that are too small to have a generator. There was a story about a restaurant this week where they're just a little bitty place, and there's the chef in there, or the cook, and he's got a little headlamp on while he's making his borscht, and he's got a little camping stove that he's making his coffee on, and little couples in there, dining by candlelight, not just because it's romantic, but because there's no other way, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. So last week, I shared a story about Bill Littlefield, who, did the was on public radio for 25 years on It's Only a Game, and he's just written a book about his work now since he's retired with prisoners and how he's teaching in the Boston the Boston prison system there. And he's been doing that for 4 years, and he's written a lot about how transformative it has been. That before he did this, kind of started in this work about restorative justice, he knew, like we all knew, that a whole lot of people are in prison who shouldn't be, right? People are in there because of their race, because of can't afford an attorney. And the longer he's done it, the more he's come to believe that really about nobody should be in there, that we've got to find a different way, that people are locked up for way too long. And in his writing and in his books, he keeps speaking about being a witness. He's a witness, and that's what we're called to do, right? That's what John the Baptist does. He's not the light, he's the witness to the light. And so Christmas is a reminder that we're all called to be a witness to that light in the world. So last week I mentioned Amy Littlefield, Bill Littlefield's daughter, who covers abortion for The Nation and New York Times and Washington Post, and I've kind of made a connection with her this summer. And she took the sermon I preached last week and she sent it to her father. And so I got this lovely response back from him this week. And he said, he was so touched because he had no idea anybody was really paying attention to his work, and it was so moving and to see that. And then he said, that he continues to try to struggle with this, that, thankfully a lot of the guys he's been working with in prison are about to be released, but a lot of them aren't. And he said, yesterday was the very last day of our semester, and tomorrow one of the guys he's been working with for 4 years was going to be released after 31 years to go home and live with their daughter and his family. And he said, he's a very kind, contemplative man, and I know he will be a gift to everyone who meets. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. May this Christmas Day remind us that each of us has the ability to be a part of the life and the goodness and the light that continues to come into the world. Amen.